Colleagues, we are going to kickstart it today. I'm Deb Bhattacharya. I chair the Bangladesh Citizens Platform for SDG Implementation. I work for Center for Policy Dialogue, CPD, in Dhaka, and these are the two relevant possibly affiliations for this afternoon. And as you know, we are going to discuss possibly one of the under-discussed subject, what we call understated subject, the role of the non-state actors. What is non-state actors? We are going to clarify it in the course of our discussion. And we would like to see how these non-state actors are making their contributions in the SDGs and why we opted for that thoughts. We will be soon unpacking that. But let me start by thanking Concern Worldwide for hosting us today here, and our other partners, Oxfam International, Hunger Project, and Center for Policy Dialogue, as well as the Citizens Platform in Bangladesh, for organizing this bit peculiar session, I would say, on a very unusual subject, and which is going to see a very unprecedented discussion in the next couple of hours. And so let me start by requesting Colin Kelly, who is the CEO of Concern Worldwide. Colin had been the CEO for the last 2 years, and Concern has witnessed possibly the two best years under her leadership. And she had been from the private sector and a great communication expert. And so we are very pleased to introduce her today to you, all of you, in her own office. Huh? You know, that doesn't happen every day. Yeah. Colin,
thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As you said, I'm Colleen Kelly, the CEO of Concern Worldwide US, and it's my privilege and pleasure to welcome all of you. I know a lot of you came a long way to be here, and it shows how important this event and this discussion is going to be. Also, thank you to Citizens Platform for SDGs Bangladesh, the Hunger Project, and Oxfam for co-hosting this event. I think it'll be a great discussion today, and we thank you again for coming. I think Kirk's going to take you through what's going on today.
Yeah, we had just a couple comments from our team in Bangladesh as well, who wanted to say hello to everyone. They couldn't make it out here themselves, but they're huge proponents of what's going on here today and huge supporters of the platform and the various NGOs here. So a big hello from them. I think the key things that they wanted us to stress, and that hopefully will come out over the course of the next couple hours here as we discuss this, is that the challenges for NGOs in terms of getting their work recognized and contributing to the SDGs are immense. And we really need to work together, northern, southern, civil society actors as well, to really figure out how we can address this issue and come up with some real concrete solutions to bridge that gap and get that information and everything in there. Concern Worldwide is extremely committed to the Sustainable Development Goal process. It's written into our global strategic plan and all of our individual country strategic plans. We're especially happy and thankful to see that this number 16 is being looked at this year. It's a big part of what we're doing, especially as we move more into conflict and fragile affected states. So we're really happy to see that being happening. And furthermore, we work really closely with governments and CSO networks such as the Citizens Network, because we feel like you have to make a concerted effort to advance these achievements together and to really deal with some of these problems and really elevate them. So yeah, without further ado, I think we would jump right into who's going to be our first speaker.
I'll get them. Yeah. Thank you very much. Kirk has been very helpful in terms of getting this virtual reorganization of this real event in this place in a very short period of time.
Very short period of time.
Very short period of time.
And a big thank you to Oxfam for the massive amount of food. So eat heavily and enjoy.
This is a real, a participatory collaborative exercise. Well, please stay with us. Because we are in the premise of Concern Worldwide. The food is there thanks to the courtesy of Oxfam International. The presentation is from Center for Policy Dialogue. All of us, we flew at our own cost. The platform did not do it in that way. But the intellectual origin of what today we are going to discuss lies with the platform. I'll come to that, but before I welcome all of you, all the friends. I always thought that all these meetings are usually done to meet up with old friends. And if you go back with a couple of new, then you are very, very successful. And if on the way you pick up 1 or 2 ideas, then it is a super success. So, you know, the ideas are incidental. Meeting up with the friends is the most important thing. So I see all my friends over here. And I also like to recognize the presence of the Honorable Member of Parliament from Bangladesh. He is here. Mr. Elias had been there for on that, and had been there on the chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Labour, and had made serious contribution in this way, and we are very grateful that he is here today. And we have also from our local government participants as well over here. So, and all the leading NGOs and from all over the world. Now, just let me tell you why we are here on this particular issue. This year, when the 4th assessment or the 4th year of the HLPF was coming up, and at the Citizens platform in Bangladesh, which is a platform of more than 105 non-government, both private sector and the SDG and non-government organization, and many of them are here in this room. And we were trying to put together a report to show what the non-government sector is doing for the SDGs. Because we recognize that the voluntary national reviews are essentially voluntary government reviews. I don't call them VNR, I call them VGR. And as a result, we wanted to have the NGO contribution and the private sector contribution adequately reflected. But while doing that, we found that it is not an easy job, because what exactly they are doing and how they are related to the goals, that may be somehow implicitly done. But how do you going to assess them, their contribution in terms of reaching those particular indicators, or we should not be assessing their goal contribution to the indicators? That itself was an issue. So once we finished the report, and the report is there with you, you may have a look at them, and we prepared the 6 goal reports and an overview report, all led by organizations which have demonstrated expertise in those areas. And then we came up with this whole question at the end of the report, that did we do it right? And if we have to do it again, how do we do it differently? And how it can be really mainstreamed and to be integrated with the global, national, international processes? And do we have anything else elsewhere going on in the world, and we need to learn from each other? So that was the whole purpose. So the 3 questions which come up today will be that did the NGOs or the non-government actors change their tactics or their strategies or their method of intervention after 2015? That is one question. Second, how do you really assess their contribution? Do you look at how much money they are spending, or how many immunization there is taking place, or how do you relate their contribution to the decrease in maternal mortality or anything else, or for that reduction of poverty for that matter? And at the end of the day, how can we really develop a robust methodological approach and analytical approach to assess their contribution across the world and come up with a global report? Come up with a global report on the contribution of the non-state actors in delivering SDGs. So obviously in partnership with the government, in partnership with the private sector. Those are the, the background from which we approached this one. And we approached our colleagues, and they responded very well. And this room is a testimony to that. Thank you very much for being here. So let me put in Tawfiq, who had been coordinating our work on this particular issue in Bangladesh. He is a senior research fellow at Center for Policy Dialogue, CPD, and good ideas are usually contained within 10 minutes.
Thank you. No, I think that was a very good introduction, and we didn't need to talk about it much. The idea is that when we talk a lot about non-state actors, usually we are caught up in the NGO sector or CSOs and something like that. But when we at the platform and in general we talked about non-state actor, we went beyond that. We had these 4 blocks to be exact. We tried to cover NGOs, which is not for profit, and also the social business, which is kind of new thing. And then we also have the knowledge and advocacy community, think tanks, academia, CSOs, unions working on the advocacy things. We also have private sector, which is already recognized as a real force, but not necessarily documented its contribution to a great extent in the global literature. And the 4th one is media. This is probably the weakest link among the discussions of non-state actors. We do recognize the role of media, but we haven't really assessed the kind of effectiveness of media and how it can be measured. Can go to the next slide. So this is not only from the SDG era we are talking about. We really thought that the role of non-state actors were very important during the MDG era, and in that during that era, it was not necessarily officially recognized as a force. It was the government and the development partners, more specifically, if you can, the bilaterals and multilaterals and the UN system. But then we moved out from the, and we kind of developed the MDG discussion through the CSOs. They have discussed about the silo approaches. They have also thought that there is a need for financing discussions. So academics come together, think tanks come together, and then the framing of SDG was actually contributed to a great extent by these non-state actors. Can go to the next slide. So when it comes to the implementation of SDGs, we thought that there are 4 ways or 4 stages of SDG implementation where we can trace out the contribution of non-state actors. The first one was on the agenda setting. That we know that we have the SDG, we have the 2030 agenda now, but still at the country level we need to put together strategies and policies, and also at the regional level and at the global level. So agenda setting is a huge contribution in that way. Then we have implementation, so actually delivering the promises there. We also need to monitor, and then the accountability framework. Can you go to the next slide? So we will break down each of these stages. So on agenda setting, we have that we need to identify the priorities. This is something we haven't really done. At the country level, there is a very, very weak system on that. So priority setting is something that we non-state actors have been contributed to, particularly in promoting the voices of the marginalized from coming out from the promise of leaving no one behind. The third thing is we also need to influence the policies and give feedback to the government as well. So this is also a feedback mechanism that non-state actors will have to play. And sometimes they are also contributing in drafting new legislations and policies. The next slide, please. The second thing is on the implementation. So NGOs, CSOs, and others, they are providing services, sometimes in partnership with the state. They also give us innovative approaches, technology, productivity enhancement. These are the areas particularly private sector has been championed, and also CSOs and NGOs come together. The third thing is introducing the best global practices. So we bring knowledge from other countries. Not often the state machineries are good in that way. The fourth one is on the new global compact. So the businesses and others, they are having a new global compact, so they can also contribute to that. The third thing on the monitoring. Yes. So this is something where I think the CSOs or non-state actors' roles are not adequately recognized at this moment. So there is a need for new data and technology, but often it is not discussed that how the non-state actors will come into play. CSO monitoring, we have discussed a lot on unofficial data during the SDG discussions, pre and post. But at the country level, we haven't seen much progress in this area. So there has been a lot of talk, but somehow the state machineries are not ready to accept unofficial progresses. The third one is analysis by think tank and academic. So this is still an early stage, but what we have seen in the VNRs and others, that non-state actors' analysis are not adequately recognized. And finally, private sector data. There is still a lot of discussion there. People are using it, but these debates are not adequately addressed in the official monitoring of SDG. Can you move to the next slide? And finally, the accountability mechanism. Definitely, this is one area where we have the entire non-state activities going on. It's also about raising awareness because we have seen that maybe it was discussed a lot at the global level, to some extent at the country level or state level, but not necessarily at the local levels. But as we move from 2015 to 2019, we have seen that localization of SDGs have really emerged as a major issue in the debate at this moment. And finally, can we move to the next slide? So what is next? So these are the three areas Dr. Dev has said that we are really concentrating now, that how CSOs have changed their priorities, or non-state actors changed their priorities, how they have approached, or particularly from the point of view of leaving no one behind, and finally, can we have more acceptable framework for analysis to assess the contributions of non-state actors, because at this moment the official monitoring or progress reports are not adequately capturing this. Can we move to the next one? So has there been a change in the status quo? In terms of priorities, we haven't seen much change, to be honest. What we have seen that there is a kind of SDG wash in the approaches. Particularly what we have seen that from between 2015 and 2019 there is a huge surge in humanitarian aid, and there is a need for that, but which is not necessarily covered under the SDG framework. So that ate up quite a lot of resources for the CSOs as well. Private sector, they are quite a bit lost at this moment that how they should contribute. That they do understand that there is a great deal of contribution coming out of them, particularly for SDG 8 and to some extent in the area of SDG 12 and environmental stuff. But they are not necessarily have enough strategic directions from at the country level to bring them together. Can we move to the next slide? And we haven't really seen that there is a lot of recognition of non-state actors in the VNRs. This is across the board for many other countries. Although there, I think in the third and fourth year, even has come up with some direction how to capture this. So they are now coming up with more discussion, more thoughts about it. But at the state level, there has been a great degree of variations, particularly in the VNR preparation. Finally, at the global level, among the non-state actors, the southern non-state actors are not necessarily that much prominent. People who have more dominant presence or more significant presence in the north, they have some voice in the system, but not necessarily the southern non-state actors. Can move to the last slide. So if we want to come up with a contribution, we find that there is quite a few challenges to come up with one framework to really measure or assess the contribution of non-state actors. First of all, this is a diverse set of people coming together. So we have media, which is quite different from private sector. We have CSOs and NGOs and think tanks, academics. So it's a whole heterogeneity there. So how to bring them together and have one framework? Should we have different frameworks for different set of people? The second thing is on aligning the priorities under the SDG framework. So they have their own things, but they may fall under the SDG framework, they may not. So how we put them together? And how do we measure them? We can either measure them from the input side, that how much money they are putting, how much human resource they are putting, or we can bring out some output indicators, or we can bring some outcome indicators. So what is the correct level of assessment? Because often, particularly people working not necessarily on the more quantitative approaches, it is very difficult. It is also difficult to measure their contribution when outcomes are results of contribution from different actors. So it is very hard to measure them together. Because in Bangladesh, we tried to measure how much they have contributed in reducing poverty, but then again, number of CSOs have similar participants in different programs, and that can be an outcome of different state and non-state contributions. So it's really challenging to come up with a concrete methodology in there. And also there is a discussion. There is a need for discussion on the quality of data. So we have discussed a lot about the official data, but unofficial data, private sector data, or CSO data, we need to have some sort of standard to have this measurement system. And finally, there is how to accommodate them in the VNR. So there is a discussion currently on. Even DESA is looking forward to it. So ask the member states to come up. But it's really voluntary. It depends on the member state that whether that state will recognize the non-state actor's role or not. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tawfiq. I think Tawfiq, what has done is essentially brought out the questions which we had been confronting after doing this exercise in Bangladesh in the last 4 or 5 months in that way, and we are not going back from New York without an answer to this question. and the most wise person amongst us at this moment, which I know of, you're all wise, but some are wiser than the others, Dr. John Kundrat. John is a veteran in this area, in various areas, but his latest passion is community-led development and SDGs in that way. And John, you have your 3 minutes.
Oh, great, thank you.
Because I want all of you to speak, so this will be...
That's right. So in my 3 minutes, I want to step back to this issue of leaving no one behind and the issue of localization, and why are people marginalized? Why are people left behind? You know, on the
if I may interrupt you.
Yes.
You'll have to relate that to how we measure your contribution.
I will get there.
Okay.
So, but I always start with the admonition of Mahatma Gandhi, who said, whatever action you're contemplating, think of the face of the poorest person you've ever seen and ask yourself whether that action will restore her to control over her own life and destiny. So she, like all of us, live in an almost universal patriarchal mindset. Now the SDGs promised no more business as usual, that it has to be a transformative agenda. I would say that the transformation part has not happened, and it's not happened because that fundamental top-down mentality persists, and people aren't addressing it, they're not analyzing it. So we could have called the SDGs Smash the Patriarchy, but we didn't. But it's going to be up to us to fight for our own space. So why aren't local civil society, Southern civil society, INGOs, why are they being marginalized in this process? And it's because of this overarching top-down patriarchal mindset. And it was for that reason, yes, thank you, here we go, that on the day the SDGs were launched, many of us here launched this movement for community-led development to emphasize that little hashtag there, shift the power. We really need to transform this mindset and have people start thinking that that woman must have voice. To be a full, dignified human being, we must organize society to ensure that she has been restored to control over her own life and destiny. Now, how do we measure that? Next. Thank you. We have set 5 goals for this, and we're doing a big research project to develop measurement systems across all of the NGOs and grassroots organizations that are involved in the movement. We saw that at least 12 of these SDGs can only be solved through integrated strategies, gender-focused strategies at the community level. So our goal is to restructure society so that there's voice and agency for women, youth, and marginalized groups, that there's adequate community finance. Now this is a big one. If local communities have no money, you can't have community-led development. You can only have top-down development. So devolution is a huge priority for us. Good local governance, which includes the voice of civil society, and especially the women's groups, the collective voice of any group that's been marginalized. Individual voice isn't going to cut it. They need to be organized, and all of us need to be fighting for that organization quality public service, and resilience. Those are our 5 goals, and we're designing a whole measurement system for it.
So just 10 seconds more.
Okay?
That is, this measurement system
Yes.
are not necessarily linked to the SDG indicators.
But they are.
Yeah, please,
So,
10 seconds on that.
So SDG 16 calls for participatory decision making. Now, for that woman in that first slide, how can she have participatory decision making at the parliament level? She is going to be participating in decision making if there's meaningful decisions being made in her community within walking distance. So that goal is 16, the goals of gender equality, and really from our perspective, the rest of those SDGs, which are being measured, won't be successful unless there's this shift in power to local communities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me call on Anne Frey. She is the Concern Worldwide US Director. I love her not because she is the US Director, but because she has given extraordinary service to Bangladesh for 8 long years as the Concern Head. And
one of my first loves.
And remains so, hopefully.
Yeah, and I'm not going to take 3 minutes, and I suppose, you know, with the 2 presentations that happened just now, particularly with Shafiq's, you know, where he looked at, you know, how are you going to bring those 4 groups of people together, the media, civil society, and the other 2 that I don't remember, and I suppose the thought crossed my head.
Private sector parliament.
But how do we bring ourselves as civil society together? I mean, we struggle with this almost in every context that we work. You know, we all have mandates, we all kind of work in silos, we try to come together, we work sometimes together, sometimes we make it work. And so I think the challenge for us is enormous. And I think it's really good that here in year 4, Shafiq, that you said that they're beginning to look at a framework that people can perhaps feed into, and I think that it would be interesting to see that going forward. And, you know, I was going to just have one question, but Shafiq already put it up there, is
yes.
How do we as civil society, be that local or international civil society, translate our perhaps sort of micro projects into something that gives you evidence to put into an SDG report? And I think we struggle with that. We see the successes we have at a micro level. We sometimes feed it into the meso level, but I think we really struggle.
Let me interrupt you. Is it a question of scale, or is it a question of being different?
I think it's both. I think it's a question of scale, and that's a bigger topic than we can deal with because we don't get the money, and certainly I would say national civil society in many countries are working on short-term grants that are small, and their ability to feed into the SDGs, I think, is very difficult.
And they're different.
And they're different, and I think they are different. But I think, I mean, you know, what you present, that everything we do ultimately should be feeding in, and I think if that framework exists, there could be opportunities for us to do it. And I think, again, I can speak for Concern, but I suspect for many NGOs that are present, we are using the SDGs as a backdrop to what we do, and the question is, how do we develop the systems that feed that upwards? And then I was just going to finish off with one example of what Concern does, and you know, whether it's fully successful or not, but with the devolution of government in Kenya to the county level. You know, in the initial years of that, the local government would look at the 90 villages they had, and they'd divide their budget into 90 and say, you can all have a little slice of it, because you're all our friends, and we can't really decide amongst you yet. And the Concern's work in Marsabit was really dealing with communities through the community conversations. And we brought the government and the communities together. And now at this point, and I'm not going to be able to say how many years on it is, the community are actually driving where the government's budget is spent. You know, and that's an example. Now, whether that is actually feeding up into the framework for the SDGs, I actually can't answer. But I do think that it's an example of how what John was talking about, and working through communities and getting communities to be in charge of their own lives and to give them a sense of dignity is probably very important.
Thank you.
Lessons.
Colleagues, I have the last colleague from the co-organizers as a panelist. I have Dr. Dipankar Datta, who is the Oxfam Bangladesh director, to invite him over here. They are also partner with CPD, and we are doing a big project on how to localize SDGs in Bangladesh through the community-based organization over there. That's something which is going on. Dipankar.
Thank you. So maybe what I can focus on could be something interesting that I have been hearing at HLPF sessions over the last couple of days. I want to begin with that. I picked few key points, and that's a bit alarming. Like one of the points that came up repeatedly: inequality, hunger, biodiversity showing negative trend.
Why are you concerned? I am happy that at last these are being discussed.
No, concerned because when it shows negative trend, that means the gain that we achieved at MDG is disappearing now. That's why I'm concerned. Private sector cannot supplement state action. These are I just picked few words. These are the words that I picked there. VNR process should be more interactive. Reaffirm commitment of partnership with CSOs, which is good. I think the recognition is coming up,
yes.
and that gives a very good indication here that CSOs have a greater role to play in deconstructing some of these findings. Like if it is a negative trend, why? At what level it is happening? What is the main reason behind that? Is it a structural issues, or is it a climate change issues, or whatever it is? It needs a serious engagement. But I think in terms of measuring it, I'm really glad to see the Hunger Project initiatives. I think we should not forget even Professor Robert Chambers, who talked about this PRA, PLA, RRA from early 90s. What was the fundamental principle? That community should lead the process, should be empowered in the process. What was the fundamental thing? Leaving no one behind at that point of time. Leaving no one behind is the core of the humanity. Why people should stay behind. But now, how do you ensure that? CSOs have been working to ensure it. I know agencies in Bangladesh working in Chor area, Haur areas since early 90s. So it's nothing new for them. But in terms of measurement, in terms of new challenges, I think we need to understand a little bit here. I think there is an issue of globalization. There is an issue of new communication technologies.
Are the non-state actors ready for this challenge?
No, that's what I'm coming. So, how non-state actors are playing their role in this new context, in the globalized context, with the new technology context? The problematic part that I see when I look at any evaluation report, monitoring system needs to be strengthened. That's the common recommendations I see in any evaluation report. That means there is some problems in the data collection system, data processing systems. I think though PRA was strengthened, lot engagement of community was discussed, I think over the last 15 years we deviated lot. I think we are trying to get maybe sort of like quick turnaround with our findings. Recently we just tried to find out how much money goes for a gender segregated program in a humanitarian context. We could not find out the real data. It's very hard. It's a basic thing. But when you now talk about SDG data in various
gender segregated impact
data, like how much money goes for gender programming directly. We just wanted to find out that data, and it was very hard to find that data. And now when you talk about that kind of complex programming, it's very hard to find. So we do not have the statistical infrastructure and sinking infrastructure. What I'm telling sinking, there are a lot of global indexes you see now. Even the indexes of happiness, indexes of well-being, indexes of business, ease of business. But how do you sync your local data with the global data? And how do you hold the government accountable? I think these things are important in terms of syncing, and that's where CSOs can play a very important role into the whole process. And that challenge will remain because resource, I think the CSOs reliant on the resource flow has changed. I think more and more different, we are more reliant on the restricted grant to most of the CSOs. I think that's often counterproductive for the data that we want to collect, the way we want to use data. I think this is very serious consideration. CSOs really need to look at it and really to invest into that process, deconstructing the bigger issues. I think I should stop here. I have taken.
No, you have hit the nail on its head. So thank you very much. I think everybody is sinking now, not S-I-N-K sinking, you know, because it is getting heavier on as we move on that. Thank you very much. Please don't forget to warm him up. Thank you. So those were the three presentations we've had up front in terms of those who are in the action on the field. So I'm now going to bring in three more people who are going to assess these actions from a bit, they're engaged, but they're a bit on the side. So to bring in those kind of people. Let me bring in first Shannon. Shannon Kidone is the Director of Policy at the Canadian Council of International Cooperation in Ottawa. Shannon is an old friend of Southern Voice. Well, I have the other affiliation. May I welcome particularly my Southern Voice colleagues. Please raise your hands, the Southern Voice partners who are over here. At least you have three continents, Asia, Africa, Latin America. I can see Bolivia, I see Peru, I see Senegal, I see Ecuador, Bangladesh. Yes, Sri Lanka and many others over here. So thank you very much all being here. Shannon. Good friend.
Thank
may
you.
not be after the question, please.
Well, I may not be after you get my answers.
Yeah. So what do you think? Are we being pompous that we are not being recognized?
No, I don't think that you're being pompous in the fact that you're not recognized, but I think that there's a bigger picture piece around this, which is the enabling environment for non-state actors to even participate and then start thinking about what their contributions are. And, you know, we know that the space for civil society is shrinking. We know that if you're in the business sector, there's still massive business enabling environment issues within different countries that stop you from carrying forward more progressive pieces. If you're in the media or you're a human rights defender, then maybe you're in trouble depending on what country you're in. So I worry about a framework that tries to monitor the assess the contributions of stakeholders that aren't in an environment where they're enabled to truly contribute. So I think the broader sort of enabling environment piece is a really important element that foregrounds this kind of discussion and really can either undermine or can enhance the ability of these stakeholders to contribute. In terms of your points around, you know, what's changed, the SDG washing or not, I agree completely with Tawfiq. You see that all around. That's very common. And I think what would be interesting to think about in terms of assessing is I'm less concerned with whether we can link direct results to SDG indicators, and I'm more concerned with the transformative elements of the agenda. So how are we working differently? How are we working across sectors? How are we, you know, reaching the furthest behind first? Are we taking rights-based approaches? Are we taking intergenerational equity approaches? You know, planetary boundaries, is that a big part of how we carry our work out? And so for me, I think I'm not sure that you can assess that, but success for me when I look at this agenda is, yes, it's the targets, it's the indicators, but it's also just the way we do business. And I'm not sure exactly how you get there, so maybe I flip that challenge over to you, Deb, if I know way to assess that. And then maybe just a word of caution to end my comments is really around just being careful about any kind of framework that might undermine the diversity that already exists. So I think large civil society organizations are going to be in a better position to, you know, to potentially link, you know, their activities more concretely to the monitoring framework. But, you know, you think of small volunteer-based organizations with 1 or 2 people. Like, are we really going to expect them to report against those? So that's, you know, just a word of caution in how that would be.
My last, one question to you, Shannon. How did the Canadian civil society organize themselves in getting their contribution assessed? Is there any way of doing that? Did the Canadian civil society do anything about it?
So we don't have a specific framework for that. What's happened more in the Canadian context is a showcasing of sort of examples of success. And the case study approach is more common. But there is some work happening in Canada around data interoperability, and so how can we kind of better link the way that the private sector already is reporting on sustainability indicators with the SDG framework, for example. And that conversation has engaged a wide cross-section of stakeholders, but it's quite early days. But I know for the Canadian government, one of the priorities going forward will be the data question and the question of, how can we better engage and monitor the efforts of non-state actors.
Thank you. Shannon, by agreeing with us, gave us a couple of challenges. Whether the shrinking space is a challenge or enabler, and also our enthusiasm for getting an assessment framework should not suppress the diversity within the community which we have. Interesting point. Thank you. So let me now bring in Dr. Peter Taylor. Dr. Peter Taylor is also one of the friends of the civil society. He masterminded, he led the whole think tank initiative during the last 10 years, for good or for bad. That's a legacy he's going to cherish, hopefully, and soon going to be the director of research at Idea Center in Sussex. Peter knows the sector very well, so I greatly value his opinion. Where we are going to?
Where are you going to? Well, first of all, I think it's really great that you're actually bringing this into the discourse, particularly at this time when lots of people are coming together to gather to think about progress and to think about different actors who are involved. I think the comment that we heard earlier about looking back at the legacy of work to bring in different stakeholders and particularly communities and citizens isn't new. There's a long history of participatory approaches, different kinds of engagement, but it's always challenging to maintain it, and particularly to avoid some of the problems that we all are familiar with: participation of cooptation, manipulation, facilitation, all of these difficulties that we've seen historically that tends to happen when efforts are made to engage citizens and different societal groups in these kinds of processes. I mean, I think there's no doubt that the value of doing this is very clear, and I think there are questions though about who is driving the agenda. We can see that from the perspectives of citizens that could be understood as achieving greater social justice and also addressing inclusion and helping to grapple with the challenge of leaving no one behind. But at the same time, we know that these processes can be manipulated, and we also know that there's growing mistrust in evidence, in data, in the kind of knowledge which is being generated through these processes. A lot of challenges around credibility and legitimacy. We've been having some interesting conversations about ways in which citizens can engage in public policy processes, and particularly the value of citizen evidence. And we've had some conversations, particularly more so in the African context, and there were 5 points I'll just very quickly throw out that people have raised as being really important. One is that as you're engaging through these processes, the quality of the relationships which underpin them are crucial. There are issues of trust, there are questions of expectations. As you engage people, you raise expectations, and people may not be entirely clear about what's their role in decision-making processes, or even what those decision-making processes look like. And who are the participants that you want to bring together? So I think what's interesting is you've got this topic introduced as 4 circles, where you've got different groups, civil society,
media, private sector,
parliament.
Public representatives.
And private sector is an interesting one because there's often an immediate, fairly quick gut reaction.
That's an elephant we are not going to grapple with this afternoon.
No, not this afternoon, but it's definitely an elephant which is very present and getting larger, and more present. So the relationships dimension of all of this is hugely important. The mechanisms that you have available to facilitate this. So I know you've talked about in the Bangladesh context, the Citizens Forum, very interesting. We've got lots of new technologies which are coming into play now, which are giving the opportunity for people to engage virtually, for example, through different channels. But at the same time, we know that technologies can be exclusive as well as inclusive. They don't necessarily serve the needs and give access to everybody in the same way. We also have an issue around the question of in which direction is the information flowing. So you may have citizens engaging in public policy fora and commenting on it, but what happens to the information which is then generated? Where does it go? How does it get back to them so that they actually are users and they have that two-way role in accountability processes? Another question that's been raised just now several times around voice and representation. So who's driving the process? Who decides who's included? We know that large community representative groups. They're not always necessarily terribly representative. And how do you account, as Shannon was just saying, for difference and diversity? These are not monolithic, homogeneous groups. Power, the fourth one, is a very crucial element. One of the things I love about Southern Voice is that right from the start, you put out there that one of the key aims of Southern Voice was to shift the balance of power asymmetries in relation to global dialogues around development. And I think the SDGs gives a fantastic opportunity to do that. But we also know that when you get into issues around power, you start to move into political territory, sometimes with a small p, sometimes with a capital P, issues of empowerment. You know, what are the lessons, what are the tools, what are the strategies that people use to good effect? Think tanks that we've seen through the Think Tank Initiative experience that's been very successful is where they've used timing very well. For example, at moments of elections or political processes which open the doors, because sometimes political parties are actually open to listening to non-state actors. And then the last part, the fifth one I would just say is, you know, how do you grow and sustain this? And I think this is where measurement is important. How do you show the success of this? You know, we're talking about the value of using evidence, data, ideas which are being generated by non-state actors. What's the evidence to demonstrate that actually works? So, you know, ways of understanding the contribution that makes. Is it always positive? Sometimes is it negative? What's being learned from successes and what's being learned from things which work less well? And, you know, trying to take as learning-oriented approach as possible seems to be a very important aspect to introduce at this moment. Yeah. Will that do?
No, you have further problematized the problem.
I know.
So you have further problematized it. Give me a solution. You can't go away just giving all these problems to us and just walk away from that. One solution. Where do we start?
The classic answer is more research is needed.
I love that answer. But you see, I'll pin you down. You see the quality of relationship, flow of information, and the voice issue, the power relationship, and sustainability. Yeah. Is it in that order?
No, I think it's this is an integrated mix of things, and you can't wait for one thing down the line in order to do something first and then do something else. You know, it's like, okay, power. Addressing power issues is difficult to do, so we'll wait. Well, you can't wait to do that because it's often those intractable power relations which are the problem right from the start. So that makes it difficult because you're dealing with a lot of moving targets right from the beginning, and you're trying to often prioritize and to see where can you make some progress, you know, initially. I think one important thing I would say is going to be very valuable is to really promote a really strong exchange of learning and experience from different people who are doing this in different national contexts. I think you have to be very careful with the contextual element. How this works is going to vary from context to context, but there's a lot of lessons that can be learned about how people have dealt with addressing, you know, generating and creating and sustaining positive relationships. You know, how have people, what kinds of tools, what kinds of methods, what kinds of approaches have helped to address power relations and start to see shifts in that. You know, how are you starting to see truly inclusive approaches working in practice? If that looks like that in that context, what would it look like in another context? So I'm not just talking about networking, just sort of random information exchange, but I think there are some questions around these kinds of issues that you're grappling with that would warrant some focused exchange of knowledge and experience from different national contexts, and a lot of learning could be generated in that way.
Thank you. Now I'm going to bring in Madam Mintu Pham. She is the policy director at the UN Foundation in New York, and she had been the perfect, you know, the outpost for many of us who do not have offices over here and cannot afford to be here too. And UN Foundation, under the leadership of Mintu, had been very generous to many of us, have provided the open platform for discussion, and she hosts a lot of you know, Chatham House rule-based discussions where the missions come and talk, open up their mind, which usually they do not share with us within the country. So Mintu has a lot of insight. Are we dealing with a real issue?
No. I'm afraid to say. I think you've started to hint at it. Wow, this is awesome. Now I can see all of our friends in the room. Hi, everyone. I thought I would start. I mean, I say no because I thought I would start.
She loves shocking people. Come
by,
on.
by quoting. Actually, you shouldn't hear it from me. By quoting a couple of youth that we've heard this week already.
Okay.
So I think this might have been earlier today. The children and youth major group said, "I don't want to be part of your VNR process. I just want you to do something."
I'm feeling like
Are
a
you
youth
transforming the world right now? Why are all these seats so empty?
Yeah.
Why are you on your phones? Is this not important enough? On Tuesday at the opening, a youth leader from Micronesia said, "We don't need more power," meaning youth. We don't need you to give us more power. We need more courage from you. So I thought I would start there because I think at the end of the day, and Peter touched on this, it is about power, and I think I didn't realize there was going to be a video here, so this is me in my personal capacity. I think we do need to talk about the politics of this. We are 4 years into the SDGs. They are this feel-good, agenda that everyone seems to want to embrace and do their SDGs wash and brand themselves as being an advocate or a, implementer of the SDGs. And at the end of the day, I don't think we've actually seen the transformation that everybody thought we would. Given the numbers of people who know about the SDGs at this point, given the enthusiasm, the amount of money that's been put into advertising and branding yourself and all of this stuff around the SDGs. And I think that we do need to find what are those parts of it that does need to become a little bit more political. And I don't mean that in the big P, I don't mean that in terms of being necessarily controversial, just to be controversial, but to really try to drive us to being where we need to be. What is politics about at the end of the day? So we've talked about having the data and understanding where we are in progress on the SDGs and all the drivers of change and the things that we need to focus on, whether it's statistical capacities or financing or the right types of interventions. But I think knowing what needs to be done is very different from getting it done. And to get it done, we need to really focus on the politics of it. Politics is about changing behavior. It's about changing behavior in this very short period of time. And so if you're going to do that, how do you change the politics? Tofik put this up there. Part of it is awareness raising. Great. I think we've done that. Clearly there's more to be done. But the awareness raising, that's there. Secondly, access to power and decision makers. So if civil society, especially from the South, is going to have any kind of impact, it can't just be, oh great, let's put some nice pictures of, poor people in villages somewhere and just say, okay, great, that's how we're going to make ourselves feel good by doing something for that person. This is really about how do we make sure that the real needs of those folks are then given voice to the people who can make the right types of decisions. So how do we make sure that access of civil society leaders from the South, including by partnering with their international counterparts, can really reach the right types of places? And that's a role that I've been really proud to try to play over the last few years. And some of that is a translation role. Some people say, well, are you guys a little too close to the governments? Are you a little too close to the private sector? Are you and sometimes you do need a bit of a gateway, a person or an entity playing that gateway role and translation role so that we can help to provide pathways for access to power and decision makers. So awareness first, access second. Third is action. Obviously, civil society organizations can take action, but it's really about driving action. So identifying those really key areas that if you make it, and if you say it in a certain way, how do you make sure that that's going to change the behavior of a government official or of whoever it is that you want? And I think taking that action, whether it's implementation or actually advocacy, in the right ways and to the right actors is really needed. And then lastly, accountability. You talked about accountability, but what I didn't see here is how do you make the SDGs real? How do you really drive accountability in the process that we have right now? For the children and youth group to say, we don't want to be part of your VNR, don't bring us into your thing and make it seem like you've checked the box and you've consulted us and now we've endorsed what you've put forward in the world. There are really great shadow reports out there that are developed by civil society organizations that are really, if a government's going to hold up their own report card, you need outside actors, and in particular from developing countries, to say, actually, you know what, that grade that you gave yourself isn't what we've seen, and here's what we've actually seen. So that the next time around that government comes back and, maybe they won't just say, okay, we brought in that group and checked the box and put the youth on the stage, but we've actually now, we know that they might tell us we weren't honest about our progress. And I think that accountability is really important. The last point that I'm going to mention, because I know you're going to ask me questions, is...
No, I was just going to say that those civil society who are going to tell their government that you actually did not do what you were supposed to do, they won't be able to go back to their home.
Well, so this is where I think you partner with
they
your
will have to
international
stay in New
counterparts.
York after that.
Right, but I think this is where you partner with your international counterparts. You don't have to be the Bangladeshi civil society group that says, okay, you know, Bangladesh didn't do what it said. But there are so many really important and represented here hosting this organization who can say that, and you don't need to say that came from that civil society group.
And I did
but
mention
can speak
Bangladesh
up.
incident today.
Oh, sorry, I realized.
I want to go back home too.
All right, so, name your country, right? India, a little bit more, you know, but where
Meena
you
will
can,
not agree. Come
where,
on.
but where you know, partner with those international groups who can say what needs to be said without it coming from you, so that you can still go home. Okay.
Understood.
Lastly, I want to just talk about the framework. Obviously, as everybody said, you can't have one framework for all of the vast numbers of different types of organizations out there and civil society non-state actors. Think about what their real value is. Media can raise awareness, it can hold governments at account, it can do investigative journalism, it can find out answers and publicize it. Private sector, you know, there was a point on here about civil society now still continuing to be focused on the social pillar, and private sector still focused on the economic pillar. Be careful what you wish for. I don't know that you actually want the private sector to be involved in the social pillar. In this country, we're trying to take the private sector out of, for instance, healthcare. Yeah. Be careful what you wish for. I think every actor has a right role for themselves, and so just because a lot of actors are working on what you think is important doesn't mean that that's where they should be. Civil society, you know, obviously, as I mentioned, implementation, doing shadow reports, holding governments and others to account, and also being able to connect with citizens and making it real on the ground. The last thing I'll say in terms of that, the Edelman survey, I don't know if you guys have seen the Edelman Trust Barometer, but it's looked at 4 different institutions: media, business, private sector, NGOs, and the media. Did I already say that? Anyway, government? Government, sorry. So those 4 actors, the levels of trust in those 4 actors is at an all-time low across the 27 countries that they survey. Of those, of course, government and media are the lowest. Strangely enough, business and civil society are a little bit higher. At the top of that, for whatever reason, I think this was tacked on as a question, the United Nations is even higher than that. So just think about this sort of the gap in trust in these institutions right now, and how whatever you do, you really need to think about how is this connected to people? Does this really speak to the needs and the values that people hold right now? And is this authentic? Or are we just SDGs washing, greenwashing, whitewashing, whatever it is, so that these institutions, because people can see right through it, and that is part of the reason why there's so much mistrust.
Mintu, Peter, to speak about politics, you have spoken about politics in whatever, you know, size of the alphabet, small or large or medium. But the point is, one of the reasons why these politics or the behavioral change did not happen is because it was very government driven. There was not structured space for the citizens in this whole process over here. And after 4 years, we are recognizing the transformation has not taken place. The power relationship has not changed, just because, also because, not only because, there were not structured space for the non-government actors or the citizens to also play a role, including your youth people. So do you think that there is a structural problem in the SDG? I know the bigger picture, but let's just focus on SDG.
Yeah. So in the process of creating the SDG, I don't think that you would have gotten, for instance, Goal 10 on inequality or Goal 16 on peaceful and inclusive societies if it hadn't been for the really consultative process. I mean, I have a slide that I usually show when I do an SDGs presentation that is about death by consultation. There were so many consultations. The My World survey, 1 out of every 1,000 people filled out that survey. We then brought that to the governments and said, look, you know, honest and responsive government is one of the top things that people say they want. If you don't include that in the SDGs, you've got a world of hurt coming when you go home. Now, that was in the creation of the SDGs. Since then, I do think there has been less space for civil society. But I will caveat that by saying, if you just demand to have a seat at that back of the room in the last 30 seconds of a meeting and say that that's a win, then you've got to set the bar too low.
I'm with you on that.
The structural answer to having civil society and other voices in this is not to have an official part of the thing when only interns are left from governments in the room and you get to sort of say your piece. You've got to find a way, that access point that I made, access to decision makers, you've got to meet people where they are. And I don't think it's in the conference rooms. We're trying to find, a way to issue a long paper with your points and hope that somebody reads it. And this is a role that we've tried to play. You've got to meet them where they are. And eyeball to eyeball, where you are, there is a setting where there is a room for them to be open to listening to what you say. And sometimes that's going to be driven by evidence, sometimes it's driven by really good stories, sometimes it's driven by the fact that they don't even know most don't know the answers to the questions. So you're asking them to do things that they don't know how to do. And so they're actually can be open to hearing from groups that do know, here's an answer that we found that works. And if you find a way to do it in a safe space, governments actually are really, really open and ready to hear it. I can't tell you how many emails I get from government officials saying, where do we get started on the SDGs? We're never going to say that to anybody, but we don't even know where to start. How do we start on 169 targets when we have no data on anything? So you've got to find those spaces. I don't think it's a structural issue of asking for, can we have 3 minutes at the back of the room at the end of the meeting? Okay.
Thank you. Colleague. Thank you, Mintu. So how many of you really think, which put up the first the cover slide?
Wow. That'll take a whole moment.
So we said it is an understated subject in the SDG discourse. In the last 4 years, there had been the issue of NGOs going around, SDG Watch going around, but in terms of being there's the partnership issue, public-private partnership, non-government partnership, scaling up with the government activities, all these issues have been there. But do you think that there had never been a substantive discussion about this part as much as we had elsewhere? Disproportionately it was underplayed. Do you agree with that or not? How many of you agree with that? Please raise your hand. It was under-discussed. Why? You don't...
Ask the question again.
Repeat the question. Repeat the question. Is it really an understated issue, what we have put up on the table? Do you agree with that? This is in the last 4 years. All the side events, all the conferences which have been taking place, it was incidental if the non-government sectors had been discussed, but it was not directly their role as has been discussed, even under the MDG, has not been really focused under the SDGs. Although many issues which were in the agenda, as we say, were very much civil society driven in that way. And even within the VNRs, not VNR, I call them VGR anyway. So is there. So do you agree with that or not? Whatever with diverse way of on that. But private sector would have said also on that. Were you feeling shy? How many of you think that it is understated, under-discussed?
Is the question discussion or act?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I think in terms of whether this is an issue which was visible enough or discussed enough, even in terms of means of implementation, even under the means of implementation. Not to say, well, other things on that. So, colleagues, what we have got is that since SDGs, what has happened, that not much transformative changes are being observed. That is how being mentioned. In between, the context has changed, that there is a shrinking space for the civil society in between. So, and the power relationship is such that the access may have become constrained up to a point. Voice issue, whatever has been there, is now being questioned in terms of their representativeness. And then there is this wide diversity within the community, which exactly does not lend itself in terms of a very one singular assessment framework. And what is necessary beyond awareness building to show courage to be in actions and everything else over there. So, is this a proper assessment in that way, because I didn't hear from the 6 panelists that yes, this is an issue which would have been a change agent. It could trigger that if you possibly bring these issues more directly, will it bring more changes? Or no, there is a bigger issue out there, where this one is very peripheral. This issue is not related to the transformation which we are asking for. So I want there's 2 levels of discussions over here. One who think that yes, we agree with the diagnostics, but we do not agree that this is one of the triggers by bringing in the more visible, assessed contribution of the non-state actors. Or we are really chasing the wrong thing in order to bring in qualitative or changes or structural changes over there. The floor is open. Please, next 1 hour is yours. Fill it up. Yes, please. And all of you will have to introduce yourself, even if I know you, but for the record, please do that. Yes, yes. Stand up over there and face anywhere you want. The camera will find you.
No, it's very difficult, people are here. So,
introduce yourself.
The last issue for you.
Introduce yourself.
No, my name is Zakir Hussain. I'm from Bangladesh. I'm fully engaged with this process because we are focusing on the SDG 10 and the 16. So, part of the, we participated actively to write this report. So, I'm not going to really discuss all these things. But the last point, and the other people are saying, what would be our role? What is the civil society role? That we need to really go back and discuss. We need to really strategize in our context. What would be the role next 12 years? Already, we are crying for recognition, sort of things, and that we started and popularizing the issue in Bangladesh through this platform. And in one point, we discussed that MDG era, that the civil society role, NGO's role, was not really accommodated properly. And now we are trying to show that we have a role. So what is our role? Role can be a multiple role. Whatever implementation role, developmental role as a policy, advocacy, as well as a monitoring role. So that's most important. So this is a transformative agenda everyone discussed. So transformative agenda requires a lot of transformation in the policy reform. So that is important, key issues. It's a huge issue. It's a huge country in our context and everywhere the same. So if you want to transfer something, the government is the key. It's not a civil society, very small. We are putting some effort, and that is we want to really some recognition. That is fine. That's okay. But what are the other rules that we need to define? As you say, there is no institutional framework that we can work. We can work as a civil society, as a citizen in the country. And you have noticed that we are saying the non-state actors. Why we are saying this non-state actor? Generally we say NGOs and civil society. There are other 3 actors are there. One is media, intelligentsia, academics, and the corporate sector and business community. So if you look at the report, that there are only the CSO's contribution as recorded properly. So what are the other roles are there as a non-state actor? That has to be recorded again. So now this is the academia, like CPD is one of the think tank organization, and CPD has a huge role. So policy reform, what are the policies we need to change? What are the reforms we need to bring in the country level so that this can be implemented properly? So that's a big issue, So it's definitely it's important issues. We are working, we are developmental roles are there, we are implementing projects, we are really, as you said, the link up with the different roles. We are trying to link up that Nari Pakkaj, women's issues, we have access to justice and marginalized community, all this we are doing. But now we need to really look into what is the policy shift we need to do and how we can influence. That's very important areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Yes, please. Hey, come on. Come to this side. Who will be next? Please be ready. Yes. Please. Introduce yourself, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anne Sizomo. I work with the International Planned Parenthood Federation, the African Regional Office. So I think one of my reflection coming from the African region and interaction from other colleagues from different parts. One of the things I think as civil society is also we need to do more in working together and not in silos. So the government, one of the key things is that they also, because there's so many, non-state actors, and everyone is targeting the government. There's also this other fatigue and feeling like they're overwhelmed with the different, requests around the same, even the meetings, even the, all that. So one of the things is that how can we coordinate better to play our role so that we complement each other in terms of the strength and in terms of where we see ourselves in terms, because we all may want all these SDGs, but there's where maybe as a civil society or non-state actors where we have the comparative advantage over the other. If we could coordinate.
Are you telling us that we need to adjust or coordinate our program at the programmatic level or at the relationship with the government?
I think one is that we need to improve our coordination so that when we're also speaking, we're speaking as one voice. So when we're making these, requests or pushing the government on, maybe we're talking about SDG for its own education. If we are non-state actors and we coordinate and say, okay, this will be this, because sometimes all we are targeting is maybe one ministry, which also has very few people, and then you're going and hitting. So every day there's a non-state actor knocking at the door of that. So if I play the devil's advocate, that also gets overwhelming in that bit. But if we coordinate and trust each other, we share information which is timely, and we see engagement and all that, and not work in terms of competing with each other silently, then that could also really help. The other is also the capacity. Sometimes we assume that when we talk about SDG, we're saying the community are not understanding and all that, maybe we need to do more. But we can't cause change at the community level if ourselves we don't really understand the SDGs well and see how they link with all the different, facets. So we need to do that in terms of improving our capacity, but also to be able to break down what the SDG mean in terms of the woman or the young person at the lower level. So for me, I think that is the contribution, but also invest more in the structure or understanding the governance. Like someone talked about here earlier, is that we can learn from each other, but the context will be different in terms of how you apply, because the governance structures change or are different across. What you'll find in Kenya is different from what you'll find from Uganda. Even if it's decentralization, devolution is done differently. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you. Coordination and capacity. Good point. Please.
My name is Aminata, and I work for IPAR initiative perspective in Senegal, and I'm really excited to be here today. I just want to actually raise two questions. I mean, the second was already discussed by my colleague on the issue of coordinating the action within the CSO's platform. But the first one, I wanted to actually address one issue: why CSOs are not fully actually playing their role. When Taufik was presenting earlier, he showed us the challenges that CSOs are facing in Bangladesh, and one thing we're missing is the financial constraint. Speaking of the African context, most of the CSOs say, okay, we really cannot change policy, we cannot generate qualitative data because we don't have the financial means. And given that now, and as Shannon said, the space is shrinking for them because another actor, the private sector, is taking this space by actually providing, contributing, generating data, contributing in influencing policy, and even contributing in the social pillars, the health and education, more than the state should be doing. So really we need to discuss maybe how to really engage everyone and mobilize more resources for CSOs in developing countries, so they can really play their role within the agenda.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will bring we have colleagues, at least I see from colleagues from Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia over here. I would like to have some Latin American perspective on these issues. Colleagues? Come. Werner. Come. Yes. We want somebody to warm it up.
Yeah.
Here?
No, yeah.
Okay. My name is Werner Hernandez.
You have to speak up a bit.
From Bolivia. Sorry for the shorts, but the airline lost my luggage, so I'm wearing this the last 3 days.
This is an airline's dress?
Yeah.
This is given the
well, I think since I arrived late, I'm not getting to the issue very well, but I have, from my point of view, there are two questions. One is, what is the role of non-state actors in the development process of a country? And what is the role of the development actors in the SDGs? And from my perspective, the SDGs might not be relevant for the development process of a country. In some contexts, in other might be. So we have to make that difference. Now, how to make a framework to evaluate the contribution of the non-state actors, it's hard for me to think, because development, I think everyone in the societies in all countries would like to have a society that has all the SDGs. But each country is in a different point in this moment in time. It's a very different point for...
You have to speak up a bit to that. Yeah.
Say?
Speak it up.
Okay, everyone is in a different point. It's different to be in IT than to be in Bolivia. It's different to be in Bolivia than to be in Colombia. For sure, it's different to be in Latin America than in Asia or in Africa. In South Asia is different down in Southeast Asia. So each country has its particular challenges, and each country should find the path. It's like the priorities in which they should put more money, more effort. So what is the role of the non-governmental actors in finding this path? I think you have made the good point, is we have to have the capacity to identify the problems, to prioritize the problems. We have to find the capacity to get together and use our knowledge and to find this path. And of course, we have to use this knowledge and capacity to get together to get more power, to get our voice heard by the governments. And by the way, many governments, it's not that they don't I think that they don't hear us because they don't want to hear us. So it's not going to be a process of dialogue. It is a confrontation for some of us, at least. So that's it. Thank you.
Yes. I see. Let me bring in a colleague from the UN Office of South-South Cooperation. Please, Shams.
I was just going to address one point.
Okay, then I will bring in the other. Shams, come. You introduce yourself.
My name is Shams Benihani. I'm with the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. I just wanted to point out that we're talking about, the challenges of CSOs being heard or being engaged in, the SDGs and their involvement with the government. I think it's really, really, really critical that you do find a champion within the government who can give CSOs that space to engage, to a space for them to be heard. And this is this is not an easy way to do it.
Shams, in last 4 years, did you find observe a champion like that?
Champion.
Did you come across a champion? I want to go to that person.
Government people.
You actually see nowadays a lot of young people entering politics. You need to capitalize on that. You need to build on that. Those youth who are entering politics, who are being much interest in that. You connect with them, and they can be your voice. We see that happening. I mean, here in the U.S., we have young, female politicians who are entering, who are
from New York
speaking. Their voice is very, very loud, and I don't need to say her name or his name, but you know who they are.
We get it.
So finding that champion within the government who can give that space. So.
That is the access issue, which I meant to mention as well. So thank you very much, Shams, for that encouraging note. I am a holy, and I will come to you. Nobody is going home without having their voice.
I am Samia. I am from Bangladesh. I am an activist. I have a question.
Only answers.
No question. No one behind. But how we recognize the youth and diverse group people, and from my experience, I saw lots of diverse people. For example, is transgender people and also young people raise their some people raise their voice, but our government is recognize this one. And because our honorable member of parliament here, it is my opportunity to raise this voice. How to
don't bring
how
domestic
to
fight
incorporate
in New York.
how to incorporate their rights, their issue, their demand, and after that could be improve the SDG 2030. But after 4 years, my experience is now we are behind. But how it will be possible to no one behind? It is very tough and very, very tough job within the government, within the non-actor civil society and something. But non-actor, non-state actor, how to incorporate in the young people and recognize their demand and also and also properly fulfill their demand also. It is very important, because now in the Bangladesh is 1/3 population is youth. That's why it is very important, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, come. Please, can you?
I'm Naz. I'm from Arrow, Asia Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women. We're a regional NGO based in Malaysia. So the discussion is around role of CSOs, and I always felt that one of the biggest roles of CSOs and the most important thing is we act as eyes and ears on what's happening on the ground, the realities of the ground. We try to inform that. And basically, there has been a lot of emphasis today from the panelists on having intergenerational dialogue, and then you mentioned the need to measure the impact of SDGs on certain constituents like young people, women, and marginalized groups. But also, if you want to reach those who are the furthest behind, we really need to look at what we call intersectionalities, like a young person who is also disabled and also comes from a minority community. Like, how are issues affecting people like those? So as civil society, it's very important that we pay concrete attention to those kind of factors. And I totally agree with having youth champions within the government who can carry forward our agenda. because we do that at a regional level as well. Just to share very quickly, like when we have the APFSD forums, for instance, in Bangkok, Thailand, sometimes ARO and other regional NGOs as well, we arrange like multi-stakeholder dialogues where we invite government people from various countries to come together from a common region and discuss best practices and lessons learned. And that's a great way to create champions, because then, you know, the government officials, they learn about the issues and they learn how they can further work on that particular agenda. So building champions is very much possible.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, please. If you allow me, I will bring in our Member of Parliament at the end.
My name is Kamaruddin Umar. I'm from Ethiopia. I'm not a non-government organization. I just put myself on Hunger Project without having any leech or anything, because I was in Ethiopia months ago. Involvement was young kids and then government. If anybody's scared his government, tell me, I'll go and tell them. Because I did it in Ethiopia. What I did was, there was a minister called Ephraim. He was job creation minister. It was Expo in Addis Ababa. They call it Millennium Hall. And then I just went in and take a picture. I say, I'm going to come to your office. If you don't let me in your office, I'm going to put it on the Facebook. He was joking. He was laughing. And then I went there. And then I met the Hunger Project in Ethiopia. I went and checked the Hunger Project Epic Center, and then there is a lot of disconnection, a lot. And then I checked out, they started 2004. That's 15 years. And then it's supposed to grow more. The reason is disconnection with the government, for them young kids with technology. I'm not a college student, but I teach myself. I live in America 30 years. I'm not scared of anything. I'm not scared of nobody in the right way. I told Mr. John when I met him last year, Mr. John, I'm the person in action. I came with a hammer. If you don't have a nail, I'm walk out. So today we're driving to Canada. Those are two of my kids. I don't want them to be, when I talk right here, say, Daddy, you have accent. I don't want them to say that. So today, these things I see, I did it in Ethiopia. What I did was, the Hunger Project manager, he knows me, John Nome, I took him to Ethiopian technology minister, talking about the government minister. I took him over there. He was talking, I was talking with the minister. And then I took him to job creation minister. I took him over there. They don't know me, ask me which organization you are. I said, I don't have organization, it's by myself. I'm diaspora. So that's communication. Then the other one, if somebody knows Dr. Eleni, she used to work for World Bank, and then she created in Ethiopia Blue Moon. That's Blue Moon is investing on kids on technology. They create anything, and then she invests on them. So I took 14 kids to a Hunger Project office, 14 of them. They're creating a lot of things about farming things, technology. I took them, I introduced to Hunger Project over there. So you work with them, they're already working, you might have information, they're working together. Those kids, university students, very young. And then I took those kids to job creation minister, Mr. Ephraim, 14 kids. I took them over there. I took them 3 places. So I make the connection what you were talking about right here. Today I'm asking Mr. John, I have a lot of good dogs. I need the leash. He gave me the leash. I do my work in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. So I hope you got my idea, but I'm sorry, I have to leave. I have to take my kids to Canada. We're driving today. That's why I came today over here to stay with them. And then I appreciate it. I hope you got my number from him. If anybody want to call me, you can reach me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Andrew Hurst from the IDRC.
So I'm just going to ask this gentleman if he could wait a day and I'll get a ride back to Canada tomorrow. My name is Andrew Hurst. I'm with the International Development Research Center. I had the pleasure.
Andrew, just take a seat for a minute. You see, what is my challenge over here?
The hot seat's over there.
The hot seat's here. There's always a hot seat with Deb.
The challenge is that the session was based on the assumption that the changes what we are not seeing, one of the answer lies in having a more heightened, active, transformative role of the non-state actors. That's what could be one. And in order to bring in, to push that trigger, we need to make their contribution more visible by assessing them in a certain way, whatever way that may be. That was that. But the discussion somehow ended up a bit more on the role of the CSOs and their current challenges. But that was not the purpose of the discussion. You see, this is my problem at this moment. I'm veering towards a totally different discussion, which I thought is already resolved over the last 4 years, because we all discussed the role of the CSOs, and we know the challenges, the problems, and other things over these experiences. So the idea was whether they could be the solution in terms of bringing about the change in the coming days, and given the political summit level meeting coming up, whether we can put a message into that the CSO's role needs to be more pronounced and assessed and brought in over there. So that, and how do you do that? So that was the idea. Please, Andrew.
Okay.
You think that we were not prepared for the discussion?
Well, let me, I'll put up 2 reflections based on what you had for today.
Yeah.
And I think we should try and speak to where I think you've tried to frame this conversation. One is to pick up on something that someone said before. It's like, why are you asking this question? Is it just about one of recognition? If it's not about recognition, then what is it? What is it for? The second thing is that, to me, the conversation's too generalized, because when you talk about non-state actors, there are going to be some non-state actors that actually aren't interested in achieving the SDGs. In fact, they may be quite interested in seeing the SDGs not achieved, because they have interests and they benefit from inequality, or you can have all the kinds of things that are behind why the SDGs need to be achieved. If that, and that's the political bit, and that's where the power comes in. If that's the case, then how is it that, are there examples that you can put forward of coalitions across those categories of non-state actors that can actually demonstrate contributions to the SDG agenda, whether it's in the terms that the SDGs are framed themselves or in terms that relate to them and are complementary to them? And that, I think, is where that will be, I think, much more powerful message to government when you can show instances of coalitions across non-state actors doing things effectively, because that's both in some ways more impressive, but also I wouldn't say scary, but it's something that governments will sit up and take notice of. Because otherwise, if you're just looking at it, this is what CSOs do, this is what private sector can do. Governments will deal with those groups on separate bases. Governments are divided, ministries are divided. Some ministries deal more with private sector, some deal with more with civil society. But if you have coalitions that come together and are pushing for things, the governments then have to engage with them at a different level.
That will not suppress the diversity which was mentioned earlier.
But coalitions are, by their nature, about finding commonality within diversity, and figuring out things that, as much as those groups are different, what is it that you share, and what is it that you actually, as a group want to see achieved? That doesn't diminish the diversity, but it's about finding, and time-bound, but mutually beneficial ways of advancing change in certain agendas. And the SDG, pick an SDG or pick a set of SDGs that.
So from here on, we will take on what we do next. So what do we do next?
God, you're here, Andrew.
Yes. Peter has left. Peter said that we do more research. Some would say exchange of information and create platforms and other things, coalition building. Or we go into deep-seated retrospection and meditation.
I think a lot of it is about finding allies and looking at the ways that in the past, whether you want to look at it within the framework of what worked with the MDGs or within the past 4 years of the SDGs, where have there been critical mass of activity and groups coming together, and what can the CSO community or the broader group of non-state actors who are interested in change, what can they learn from those successes or even failures to take forward for the next 14, 15 years. And that's where I think a research group like CPD, like Southern Voice, can really help with identifying and unpacking and helping organizations and individuals understand why certain things worked. It's that whole idea that Duncan Green goes on about. Well, how has change happened?
So what coalition building based on success, action, access to power? I understand. Not so much on why SDG did not work, and one of the reason is because this is the reason. Where do we focus in terms of on success or on the failure?
I think you tend to learn more from failure, but you have to be able to tell stories of success as well, because that's what ultimately helps demonstrate the relevance of the groups that you're trying to work with, and whose position within the SDG implementation process you're trying to validate and reinforce.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm from Bangladesh as well, and I'm not so much intelligent or discussion on this, very.
No, you said two words about your organization.
Yes, I'm from Bangladesh. My name is Saiful Haq. I'm a returnee migrant. I organize the returnee migrants in Bangladesh, and I'm working in the field of migration development a long time. And also, I'm trying to bring the issue of my SDG in the migration targets and indicators, working on that. But as I told that I'm a very layman. I'm learning. Still, I'm getting a lot of informations, and the think tanks are there, all other things. But I think little. I try to act more, and that is actually the advocates and activists. So, what actually I would like to mention here that I have some question regarding the non-actors and actors, state of actors. Because sometimes we see that the actors also are very good non-actors like us to, involve with change some or reform some policies. I've seen in my last 20 years of working, because my background is not a development work. As I said, that I am a returnee migrant, and I work for the rights of migrants for a long time. And I am also involved with national and now international level a lot of networks, and I have seen that this is a very difficult, that one thing is very important is to building trust among ourselves, among the non-actors. And it is very important that today's discussion that it is the title mentioned that unstated. Because we know that in SDG 17 goals and 169 targets. Now, how many targets, how many indicators would be stated? Say in the report, if you see the migration, 8 number goals, 10 number goals, there is several targets. So report is not comes in that way. So somebody is working in different areas, say like, so we have to bring all the non-actors in different issues working together, and that is very important. And that platform should be not only national level, also in regional and international level to link with this. And that is why we could make a very, what I say that it would be a joint effort. It's not like individually you can do. Now we are doing individually. As I said, that actors could be non-actors. We are working with the parliamentarians. So we have made a parliamentarian caucus on migration development, and we are finding there is some changes in the policy reform. You have heard, I don't know, that in the last budget, Bangladesh government gives the incentive to the remittances for 2%, which is not any country are giving that. Those who are sending money through bank channel, they will get 2% extra. It is an achievement of an advocacy, and also bringing the actors in the non-actors platform. So and also this is our 10 points bringing to the high-level political forum through the consultation with the parliamentarian caucus, and other stakeholders. And also there is another document I bring with the another actors in the international organization migration with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So these things we need to have with other actors, non-actors or actors together, so that whole goal 17 of SDG could be achieved. But it is a challenging task. It will not be achieved one day or 1 year, or maybe we'll try for ourselves for next 13 years to work together. That is, I understand.
Thank you very much. So migration is obviously one of those issues which lurk very loudly in the side wings, but we have to bring it in. Please come. Colleagues, you will have to now help us through to take it forward. Andrea, Lorena, Mina over there, so if any of you would like to join in and now shape a bit towards the end. Please help us to shape it towards the end.
Well, I'll try. My name is Tim White. I'm from ActionAid Denmark. And I guess I was just, your question about the contributions and whether what we're measuring and your effort on trying to highlight non-state actors. I mean, I think what strikes me a little bit from the conversation is, if we were going to measure biodiversity in a river, the pollution of the river would be interesting. Right? I mean, if you're just looking at how many fish are there, the question is, well, why are there fish or why are there not fish? Has a lot to do with the environment around it, right? Or similarly, if we're measuring biodiversity in a forest, the quality of the forest is interesting, right? And I think somehow what I was missing in some of the presentation is, what is that environment? Because really, fundamentally, what's interesting is the relationship between the non-state actors and the state actors. And I don't see that coming through clearly enough, but I think it's fundamental, because if we talk about transformative change, by definition, that's about setting agendas and shifting power, and that's about politics. So if we are looking at how those types of transformative changes have happened throughout history, the abolition of slavery, the civil rights movement, women's right to vote, so on and so forth, they were pushed forward by civil society, but they were adopted and implemented by governments. So how is it then that we can see that linkage actually happening or not happening?
And there was no developmental NGO at that time, and still they did all these things.
Precisely, right? But so there was space. But there was space. There was a space for that type of whether it was trade union activism or other types of activism. And I think that's.
Let me push you over there. Huh? So in that case, all these guys who are doing grassroots level developmental organizations, they should rather refocus themselves in pushing back the squeezing space.
Absolutely. I mean, I think fundamentally, if we're talking about, if this really is a transformative agenda, it's about transforming the agenda.
So then we really do not engage ourselves so much in realizing indicated 16.2.A.2.
Except that, this is where I think it becomes interesting, some of the indicators in the SDGs actually have to do with civil society space, right? So 10.2 is the empowerment and social, political, and economic inclusion of all, regardless of gender, age, so on and so forth. To me, that's about influence. Or a lot of the agenda around 16 is all about inclusive governance and so on and so forth. But how well are we managing to measure that? And in your context, are we managing to look at that in a Southern context? Because honestly, I think if we wanted to get a more granular understanding of what are the limitations and opportunities for civil society activism and setting agendas, the global level indicators are not in any way sufficient, right? But one could have a much more interesting study of what are the actual opportunities. So we had a colleague here from Ethiopia. What happened in Ethiopia? I mean, how did we all of a sudden have a transformational moment in Ethiopia, and are we capitalizing on that now to actually push through a broader range of transformative agendas?
So if one focuses on the space issue, on those power relationship issues, and does not deal with, for example, directly dealing with child immunization, quality education or maternal health care, will the ruling power accept your voice or your work more legitimate or less legitimate because you do not do anything good for the country, quote unquote?
Well, no, I mean, I think
So
obviously
because
there is
that's the challenge for the day. The government will tell you
Yeah.
that they don't bother about the poor people. They are only bothered about so-called rights of liberal nature, which is essentially vanishing from the world.
Well, I mean, now we're getting really deep into how you believe change happens and how you organize people. I mean, certainly if I look at our own country, Denmark.
Because you have put up the question, I'm trying to
I get you,
but
but I guess my point would be, I think real substantive political organizing where you build coalitions from below and are actually able to push through that does also relate to actually providing some kind of basic services to people, right? Because what is it that if you really want to build coalitions, you also have to be able to provide something along the way. Certainly in my country, if you look at how did the trade union movement build power and reduce inequality in Denmark, there was a lot of cooperative housing projects. There was a lot of other types of projects that were actually delivering something to people on the ground. They created a certain constituency and a sense of support for a broader political coalition.
That is the Hamas model in Palestine.
Exactly, it's the Hamas model in Palestine. I think you could find similar models in Bangladesh where organizations have also been working like that. But there's a reason why people do this, right? It works.
And there's places where it happens in cooperation with, like in New York City, for example. There are thousands of civil society groups that are coordinated in collective impact through the municipal government. That could probably never happen with a national government.
My only point is I think we need to be careful of not having the agenda setting and shifting power piece with. If we only focus on service provision, we're missing the forest for the trees.
I'm being devil's advocate with you on this.
Yeah, I know, and I think, but the southern piece is interesting also because honestly, if you don't have the space, it's hard to use the space.
Yeah, no, the southern piece fits in very well with their changing powers and everything else, on the transformative agenda and everything. Andre, you want to say something? Please, we'll close now. We'll close now. We are, so we are getting into deeper questions now, as you can see. On that. Please, what do you think? You are the head of the Secretariat of Southern Boys. From what do you think that the researchers can do anything about it, or they are really irrelevant? We should get into more demonstration and power relationship.
Well, I don't think it has to be one or the other one, but
you have learned your diplomacy.
But no, I think that how I would wrap, or my takeaway from the discussion to wrap it up is that at the end of the day, of course, all the actors have something to bring to the table, but within the framework of keeping what is public important. And I think that is what attracted me to work with think tanks in the beginning, is that you're thinking about public policy and how can be done through the public space. So I think that if non-state actors can keep that in their agenda, they can become more effective, even if it's through their delivery or through their advocacy. But and that's my main concern with the broader non-state actors, that it can undermine the public nature of the SDG agenda.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else?
How about a vote of thanks for Deb?
No. You have totally scuttled my theme, so thank you very much for that. That's anybody else? Any thoughts? Is it an expression of deep absorption of very, high-powered thoughts which went around, or it is really a sense of despondence that it is too complicated and we won't be able to really Yes, please.
My thought is also that we need to dialogue as much as possible with the government and see where we make breakthrough. So we need to use that tactic, and at the same time we need to know when to dissent. Sometimes we dissent when dialogue would have actually had more headway, and that is a personal reflection, because I've seen sometimes that where sometimes you're using aggression, but we could have made headway with the dialogue.
So we should be more skillful about using our tools and methods
being
in that.
able to know that, to think through, like, at what point are we at? Have we explored the different ways, and why is there
maybe less response.
That
So
will take you back to your issue of capacity and leadership.
Yeah, so I think that is also very key, but also at the same time to look within the, within the context of also the shrinking space and also the bit of the accountability from all of us, but at the same time trying to see that we all doing that within the context that without, as non-state actors, because we've seen incidences where the government has actually reduced the number of the non-state actors because they are stepping up their role, making that sometimes some of the civil society role is actually shrinking out because of the increase in the role of the government taking over some of the.
No, we get the pushback.
That
yes.
is also very
Thank
in
you.
terms of reflection.
Yes.
I want to make just.
Yeah. Please.
So
go
far
ahead.
from
Yes.
Just a quick. Just two quick
You guys
ideas
have to now turn around and look at that side.
One is that I find that when we're having these conversations, we're constantly trying to ask this question on civil society has to prove its worth. We have to be proving our value to government. We have to be asking for space from governments. But the fundamental issue is that if we're actually trying to work towards more collaborative governments are representatives of civil society. And I don't think that we actually take that as a fundamental.
If there is a functional democracy, of course.
If there is a functional democracy, of course. But I mean, I think that is something that's pivotal. Like, you can't have development without citizens. And then that brings me to the second point, which is this notion about how we're using the term civil society and CSOs and civil society space. Because at Oxfam, we're starting to talk a little bit more about civic space. Because the minute we start talking about civil society organizations, we're actually talking about constructions of civil society organizations that are a byproduct of the current aid architecture, right? And so that in and of itself, you actually are creating these, you are creating this whole system where, yes, we're going to have a VNR and we're going to have collaborative formal spaces for civil society to engage with us. So they're offering these opening spaces, but then when these formal spaces are open, what informal spaces are being closed? And I think we have to be very conscious of that when as civil society, when we're making these decisions and trying to interact with governments.
Thank you. So let me bring in our honorable member of parliament, Mr. Israfil Alam, who had been here for the parliamentary caucus, but we have, kidnapped him for this occasion. Please, and hold him over here, because the best way to hold important people is to tell them that you're going to speak last. So, and they are forced to listen to all others and everything.
I'm not important people, I'm very much ordinary people.
But please.
Firstly, I want to express my respect to Brother Devokpriya Bhattacharya. He is our big brother, very senior researcher in Bangladesh, an well-known face in Bangladesh. I thank you, Oxfam and Concern Worldwide. These two institutes is very known in Bangladesh because they have very long contribution in the process of socio-economic advancement in Bangladesh. It's a very interactive event. I have enjoyed. And
I can't help you with that at the moment.
I've seen you in this interaction, there is a strong hunger to have recognition and power. But I would like to contradict you. Power is nothing. Important is work and potentiality of role what you played. Non-state actors in Bangladesh, civil society's role in Bangladesh, NGO's role in Bangladesh is very significant. Lot of peoples and government actors are there in Bangladesh. They love to recognize the role of non-state actors. There is some people also in Bangladesh, those who are not happy to recognize the role of non-state actors. But it is true, in Bangladesh, there is easy access to play the role of all non-state actors. They are working, they are researching, they are delivering so many data, so many statistics, so many suggestions to the government. Before some days, there was a very contradicting relation in between Transparency International and government. But Transparency International changed their role. They are not only doing research, they are also making suggestions, recommendations to government what should be done. Governmental agencies are taking their suggestions and recommendations. It's good. So politics is not the main issue. Issue is mutual trust, mutual cooperation in between non-state actors and governmental side. It is the main issue because ultimate target of both is same, to achieve the SDGs. So I think in Bangladesh, so many non-state actors, they will come positively and progressively to help the government how to achieve SDGs 2030. I'm very happy, I'm very fortunate and honored to be here with you all.
Thank you.
My elder brothers, Devokya Bhattacharya, is very experienced pastor in Bangladesh. We learn and learn from him. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The three takeaways in that way. One major takeaway for me is that to address the issue, if it is an issue, I think we need to take a step back. That much I followed. Step back on through two particular levels. One is the environment within which this whole thing is happening and how it is evolving. So people have mentioned about the context, people have mentioned about the shrinking space, people mentioned about the relationship between the state and the other non-state actors, and all these issues are there, and so this has to be taken note of. So, which was one thing which was possibly we didn't put it on the table today. So we take a step back. The second one is that it seems there is a lingering lack of clarity about after 4 years that what is the role of the non-state actors in general and in particular of each of their component and their interrelationship. I think this 4th year within the given that there is a summit level HLPF is essentially an opportunity to reflect back and see how they have really looked at each other and how we have evolved ourselves and looked into that. So that's another issue which we have alluded to but possibly have not adequately addressed them. And the third issue is the measurement issue. Measurement issue given all the levels of diversities and others over there, and also the demand to build coalitions and how, who represents whom, are we self-appointed representative of the left behind people or not, all these issues are there, the measurement issue, and how do you relate our measurement issues to SDGs, and to what extent it is beyond SDG to transformation and behavioral changes and other things over there. So for me, I have my grandmother told me, don't make them more than 3 takeaways, then you will never remember the 4th one. You know those my grandmother's rule. The 3 one is that one is the context, the evolving environment and within which this whole is taking place. Number 2, the community and their relative roles, and take a fresh look at them. And 3rd is the measurement, what exactly we are going to measure under the circumstances of the 4 years of experience. I think, colleagues, I feel vindicated to that extent that we have pushed all of you to come over here and this afternoon on a Wednesday, or a Thursday? Thursday.
A wet Thursday.
A wet Thursday. And you guys are still around here, which essentially shows there is a future for us. Thank you very much. Take care of it. Yes, I will see you tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Thank you for your comments. I'm a big fan of Arrow.